Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you here. If you're learning a foreign language, you're in the right place. And if you're new to the podcast, well, great to have you here. Make sure you subscribe so you get new episodes. It would be such a tragedy if you were to discover the podcast and then never hear from me again. What a disaster that would be. Seriously, the language learning is all about the long-term game. It's all about keeping it up over time. And so this podcast is my contribution to that end. All right, then. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that I'm learning Italian this year. Again, kind of. If you want to know why, you can go back to the last episode and listen to that. Let's just say I'm relearning Italian in order to have better, deeper relationships with all my many wonderful Italian friends in London. And I did sort of tease you in the last episode with a trip that I've planned, my annual study trip with Jan, my friend Jan, and we went to Mexico last year. We went to Thailand the year before that, and we documented it all on YouTube. So go and check out our YouTube channel if you want to have a look at that. And this year, I told you it was a secret, but to be honest, it was so easy to guess because I just spent the previous 5 minutes talking about Italian, so I may as well just tell you. We're going to Italy, and we're going to spend maybe not 2 weeks. Jan has a young child at home who doesn't want to be without his dad for too long, so I think Jan's probably going to take a week. I might take a little bit longer. But anyway, one of the things that we want to do this year is to actually make up for the fact that we failed to make an immersion environment last year when we went to Mexico. We kind of went to a very touristy place and ended up not actually speaking that much Spanish, or at least not on camera. We did actually speak a fair amount, but it wasn't. We didn't get it all on camera. So in Italy this year, what I want to do is to have a real immersion environment, and I want to do a homestay or something like that. You actually go and stay somewhere where I have to use Italian, and it's like there's no other choice. So I thought I would mention this on the podcast. Are you Italian? Are you in Italy? Do you fancy having me coming and staying with you for a week? Oh God, I can't imagine anything worse for you. But anyway, who knows? Do you perhaps know somebody who does homestays or would fit the bill? Would anyone that you can think of who would appreciate having a sort of crazy English guy who wants to learn their language come and hang out with them for a week? Or anything similar, anything along those lines? Do you know any tips for me? Any places you think I should go? Basically, I'm looking for kind of for cool opportunities. So if you know anything like that, let me know. Send me an email, olly@iwillteachyoualanguage.com. That's OLLY @iwillteachyoualanguage.com. I want to really try a little bit harder to plan this year, because I think last year we literally just got on a plane and thought, let's see what happens. So I want to be a bit smarter this year. Time to be smarter, Ollie. Come on, up your game. All right. Okay, so as I said a couple of episodes ago, I've been experimenting with just tackling head-on some kind of more controversial language learning topics, the kind of topics that tend to raise blood pressure and kick up opinions. And so I thought I would tackle translation this time, because translation is one of those things where people have really heated feelings about. You know, some people say, no, you should never translate when you learn a language, while other people literally rely on it for their method. So I don't really come down so hard on either way on this. I think my general view is that translation is a pretty good thing, providing you don't have too much of a reliance on it, and providing that over time you do sort of wean yourself off the need to translate and spend more time immersed in the language. But what I thought I'd do is play you the audio from the YouTube video that I recorded about on this topic, because I thought I managed to cover all the main points that I wanted to, and I thought I'd have a little experiment here with actually using the audio from YouTube in the podcast. You can tell me if you hate it, and I might listen to you. I don't know, it depends how badly you hate it, I guess. I don't think I'll do this on an ongoing basis, but it's just kind of an experiment to see how it works. Anyway, without any further ado, here are my thoughts on translation. And if you want to see the original video and all the other videos I'm uploading on a weekly basis, go to youtube.com/
IWTYAL. That's short for I will teach you a language.
Hey, it's Ollie and welcome to Hong Kong. Not that you would know it from the background, but there we are. It's one of those unusual days where the sun is beating down and yet it's actually really cold, hence the layers here. All right, so we're going to talk about translation and whether or not translation has a place in language learning. And it's one of those kind of hot button topics where you will find extreme views and standpoints all across the board from people saying that translation is evil and it destroys your capacity to learn, blah, blah, blah. On the one hand, on the other hand, people saying that translation is an integral part of learning. And to spare you the entire video, in case you want to know the answer straight away, my position is that translation is extremely useful, but of course it depends how and when and why, particularly why you use it. So translation deals primarily with meaning, okay? Meaning being as opposed to form. So form is the technicalities of how a word or a phrase is put together, the grammar if you like. Meaning is what does it actually mean? And this is important because translation can sometimes help you get there to the meaning of the word or phrase. Sometimes it can't. And this kind of gets to the root of the debate about translation. All right, so every language under the sun, I imagine, has a word for table. There might be a language that doesn't somewhere, but a word like table, if you take it by itself, is probably pretty easy to translate directly into any other language. Now, on the other extreme, you've got idioms and colloquial expressions, many of which are not easy to translate. Even a simple phrase like hello in English is surprisingly difficult to translate into Asian languages, for example, because you begin interactions in different ways. So translation is sometimes will get you all the way to where you want to go in terms of dealing with meaning. Sometimes it doesn't get you anywhere and can even be misleading. I know that there are certain language products out there where translation has been used badly, and it can kind of send you in the totally the wrong direction, like not understanding, having a kind of false understanding of what it actually is. So you can use translation across the board, from a word, from a phrase, but also as part of a methodology. So a long-established language learning teaching methodology is called grammar translation. And in this method, what you do is you take passages in the target language, and then you study it by translating it back to the mother tongue. So, for example, it could be English, and looking at the differences between the two and doing a kind of contrastive analysis to figure out what's going on. So you use the translation of what you're looking at in order to help you understand that thing in the language. And that kind of approach, actually, I think is something that I do quite a bit. In my series of language study sequences, which are in a playlist on this channel, I actually cover a technique called reverse translation, which is exactly that. It's where you take a passage in a language, translate it back into your mother tongue, and then back into the language again. And the contrast between the two can help you wrap your head around all the different intricacies, and it kind of the act of translation forces you to think about details in a way which you might not otherwise do. There are other ways you can use translation. You can have, for example, parallel texts where you've got the target language on one side, and on the opposite page you've got the mother tongue. You can do things like what are known as interlinear translations, where you have this is my least favorite thing, by the way, but that's where you have the line-by-line translation. So you have the target language and then the mother tongue. You can have flashcards, a methodology using flashcards, where you have the mother tongue on one side and the target language on the other side. So this is the thing with translation. You can use it and employ it in so many different ways, and ultimately, it has to come down to whether or not you find it beneficial. Now, my view is that it's something that is commonly found in the literature, which is that translation is inevitable. As language learners with a mother tongue, it is inevitable that we will try to translate the things that we come across. So I think a kind of real, a kind of uncompromising approach to avoiding translation can actually be unhelpful from a kind of practical point of view, because you're kind of fighting against your brain wanting to translate. And in cases where there is clearly a good translation from one thing to the next, I don't see any problem with that. I remember talking with my friend Alex Rawlings, about his experience when he taught English in Hungary for a while. And so, Alex and I, for example, are both kind of independent language learners. We learn languages by ourselves. And so we've kind of, what we do is we try to develop methods which are efficient, so we can learn faster rather than slower. And we don't want to spend 2 years learning a language when we can do it in one. And he had just done a CELTA course, which is a fantastic teacher training course, and he went to teach group classes in Hungary. And the expectation of the school where he taught was that you should teach only in English. You shouldn't use the student's mother tongue. And he was telling me about the frequent situations he found himself in where he was having to explain a particular grammar concept or a particular vocabulary item in English, where he could have quite simply given the students the translation into Hungarian and saved himself half an hour. Maybe not half an hour, depending on what it is, right? 5-10 minutes in the process. And so you've got a real question of efficiency here. And then this kind of brings you to the question of, all right, what's the cost of translation? So in an example, or rather, what's the cost of not translating? So take that classroom example, because it's very, very common around the world, and anyone who's a language teacher watching this will understand the situation. If you've got the ability to translate something quickly into the student's target language, into the student's mother tongue, so they understand what it is, then what that does is that gives you the ability to deal with that particular language point and then get on with the lesson that you've actually planned, which is probably more productive than spending 5-10 minutes trying to get the point across by remaining in the target language. I think often people fall into the trap of saying, well, if you avoid translation, if you only use the target language, then that gives you extra exposure and extra practice in the target language. Therefore, it's a good thing. But I think that's flawed thinking, because there's always a cost to that. And so in the case of a language classroom, as a teacher, you can often find yourself spending ages trying desperately to explain something using mime or diagrams or whatever, or paraphrasing in the target language, during which time you're losing the time that you needed to actually get on with and teach the lesson that you planned, which is probably more valuable. So I think it's a bit of a red herring to say that that staying in the target language for the sake of it is a good thing, because you get that extra exposure, because there's always a cost to those things. But where I think the critics of translation as part of a language learning methodology have a point is in the argument that, well, the less you translate, the more you are able to think in the target language. And this is an important point, because what often happens to people once they progress beyond the beginner stage is that they're learning for a while and they say to themselves, well, I've been learning this language for some time, but I still can't think in the target language. I find myself constantly translating back and forth to English. And this is a problem, because I'm aware that this need to translate back and forth into English is preventing me from developing a certain kind of fluency in the language I'm learning. And this is the point where I think you do need to make a conscious effort to move away from translation. And for me, I think this starts around the intermediate level, where you're at a point where you can deal with most common situations in the target language. You have enough basic vocabulary and knowledge of grammar and patterns in the language to deal with it, albeit with some struggle. But that's the point where you really can start to immerse yourself in the language and to learn, to improve by, through exposure, through extensive listening, through extensive reading. And at that point, I think you do want to start to make the shift away from relying on translation to trying to understand things in the target language. Because even if there's a struggle there is definitely a point where that struggle with what you're trying to understand is extremely beneficial, because it just it expands your zone of comfort. It enables you to deal with a wider variety of situations, and ultimately makes you a stronger learner. So over the course of learning a language, from beginning to end, if there is such thing as an end, you definitely do want to move away from relying on translation. But certainly in the early stages, I think whilst you're still getting to grips with the fundamental grammar of the language, I don't see anything at all wrong with using translation. I personally use translation a lot with flashcards and activities and things like that. in courses that I make, like conversations material, for example, which is designed to improve your listening skills, I provide the translation with that because I don't want you to look at it until you've spent a good amount of time with the material in the target language. But there comes a point where you have a need for certainty, and you have a need to understand as best you can what's being said, and that's why I always try to provide these translations there, because they do help to reduce that uncertainty and give you the confidence in what you've been spending your time on. All right, so there are some thoughts on translation. I'd love to know what you think. So go ahead and leave me a comment down below in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like more like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye from Hong Kong.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.